The polished black shoes of Rear Admiral Thompson tapped an impatient rhythm on the sun-baked asphalt of Naval Station, Norfolk. The air, thick with the scent of salt and jet fuel, was electric with anticipation for the fleet's annual commissioning ceremony. Hundreds of sailors in their crisp dress whites, families clutching miniature American flags, and a host of distinguished guests formed a sea of patriotic fervor. But the Admiral's cold blue eyes were fixed on one person, a single disruption in his perfectly orchestrated event, the unassuming female security guard at the VIP checkpoint. "I don't have time for this," he clipped, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the ambient hum. "This is General Miller. His credentials are unimpeachable. Your scanner is faulty. Let him pass." The woman, dressed in a simple navy blue polo shirt and khaki pants, didn't flinch. She held up a hand, not in defiance, but in a gesture of calm procedure. "Sir, with all due respect, protocol requires a visual confirmation from the command post. If the digital scan fails, it will only take a moment." Thompson's face hardened, a storm gathering in his features. The crowd closest to the exchange fell silent. The woman wasn't being rude, but in the Admiral's world, a civilian contractor telling him to wait was an intolerable act of insubordination. He saw her not as a professional, but as an obstacle. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant for her alone, but loud enough for a dozen others to hear. "Your job is to facilitate, not obstruct. Now step aside, or I will have you removed from this base permanently." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant cry of a seagull. The woman simply stood her ground, her gaze unwavering, waiting for the confirmation to come through her earpiece. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?
Her name was Evelyn Reed, though everyone on the security roster just knew her as Evie. At 42, she was a quiet fixture at the naval base, a woman who seemed to blend into the background by design. She was of average height and build, with watchful hazel eyes and brown hair usually pulled back in a neat, functional bun. She spoke only when necessary, and her movements were economical, efficient, and imbued with a peculiar stillness that some of her younger colleagues mistook for timidness. The base was a world of rigid hierarchies, of gleaming metals and starched uniforms, a place where rank was everything. Evie wore none. She was a civilian contractor, a ghost in the machine, and to figures like Rear Admiral Thompson, she was effectively invisible until she got in the way. The whispers among the junior officers and enlisted personnel were varied. Some found her oddly intense, noting how her eyes never stopped scanning, cataloging details others missed. Others just saw a lonely woman doing a thankless job, someone who probably had a quiet life in a small apartment somewhere in town. They underestimated her. They saw her slight, almost imperceptible limp when she walked her long patrols as a weakness. They interpreted her silence as a lack of confidence. They saw her simple uniform and thought her simple-minded. What they couldn't see was the iron discipline that held her posture straight, or the profound depth of experience that lay behind her placid expression. Her presence was a study in contrasts. She was soft-spoken yet firm, reserved yet relentlessly observant. In the mornings, she was always the first to arrive, her locker organized with military precision. Her lunch was always the same, a simple sandwich and an apple. She never participated in station house gossip, preferring to read a worn paperback novel during her breaks. The book's cover was gone, its pages softened by countless readings. On her wrist, she wore a single, plain silver bracelet tarnished with age. It was a small, personal detail in an otherwise Spartan existence, a silent testament to a life lived outside the confines of the naval base. But no one ever asked about it. No one ever asked about her past at all. To them, she was simply Evie, the quiet guard at the gate, a footnote in the grand, bustling story of the United States Navy. And that, it seemed, was exactly how she preferred it. The conflict with Rear Admiral Thompson wasn't a sudden storm. It had been building for weeks. Thompson was a man forged in the crucible of naval tradition, a surface warfare officer who believed in loud commands and unwavering obedience. He saw the world in black and white, uniform and civilian, order and chaos. Evie, a civilian who operated with the quiet authority of a seasoned NCO, was a gray area he couldn't tolerate. The first significant clash occurred a month prior during a security review for an upcoming visit from a foreign dignitary. In a crowded briefing room, Evie had raised her hand. When called upon, she spoke in her usual measured tone. "Admiral, the proposed route for the motorcade has a significant blind spot between the armory and Hangar 4. The surveillance tower there has a restricted line of sight for nearly 200 yards. Thompson had stared down at her from the podium, his expression one of pure condescension. He looked at the base's uniformed security chief. "Is this true?" The chief, a Navy master-at-arms, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, technically, yes, but we deem the risk to be minimal." Thompson cut him off, his gaze returning to Evie. "The risk is minimal," he repeated, as if speaking to a child. He then addressed the entire room. "Let's leave the strategic analysis to the people who actually wear the uniform, shall we?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through the assembled officers. Evie simply nodded, her face betraying no emotion as she sat down. But the base security chief later quietly altered the route, vindicating her observation without ever acknowledging it publicly. The second incident was more personal. Thompson was jogging his usual 5-mile loop around the base perimeter when he saw Evie meticulously inspecting the chain-link fence near the back gate. She was running her fingers along the tension wire, her focus absolute. He slowed to a stop, sweating and irritated. "Everything to your satisfaction, contractor?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The wire is showing signs of corrosion near this post, sir," she replied without looking up, "and the ground here is softer than the surrounding area. It could be a potential breach point." Thompson scoffed. "I've been running this perimeter for 10 years. The fence is fine. Get back to your post and stop inventing problems." He ran off, leaving her there. The next day, a work order was anonymously submitted to base maintenance to shore up that exact section of fence. The problem was fixed, but the Admiral's disdain for her only grew. He saw her competence not as an asset, but as a silent challenge to his authority. This brought them to the commissioning ceremony, the culmination of his animosity. After being forced to wait for the credential confirmation, which of course proved Evie correct and exposed a clerical error on the general's paperwork, Thompson was seething. He saw her not just as an irritant, but as a source of public embarrassment. He was determined to put her in her place. As the ceremony prepared to get underway, a group of distinguished guests arrived late. They were a unit of Navy SEALs just back from a harsh deployment in the Middle East, their desert tans a stark contrast to the Navy's dress whites. They were there to receive a unit citation. As they approached the checkpoint, now being manned by a different guard, Admiral Thompson saw his chance. He strode over to Evie, who was now directing foot traffic away from the VIP seating area. He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to halt. The crowd, sensing a confrontation, began to watch from the corners of their eyes. "I thought I made myself clear earlier," Thompson began, his voice dangerously low. "Your job is to be seen and not heard. You are a civilian, a temporary employee. You do not have the authority to delay a 2-star general, and you certainly do not have the authority to direct personnel on my base." The laughter that had followed his earlier comments was gone. Now there were only whispers. The sailors and their families looked on, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. What would you have done if you were in her shoes, facing down a powerful man's fury in front of hundreds of people? Evie simply met his gaze. "My apologies, Admiral. I was ensuring a clear path for the honor guard." Her calm, respectful tone only seemed to incense him further. "I give the orders here.
Your contract is with base security, but your presence on this pier is at my discretion, and right now, my discretion is telling me you are a liability. I want you off this pier. Now report to your supervisor and inform him you've been removed from duty. Is that understood?" The public humiliation was absolute. He wasn't just reprimanding her, he was firing her in front of everyone. The whispers died, replaced by a shocked, heavy silence.
As Evelyn Reed turned to comply with the Admiral's brutal order, a gust of wind from the harbor whipped across the pier. It caught the sleeve of her navy blue polo shirt, pushing it up past her elbow for just a moment. For the few people standing close enough to see, the sight was jarring. Snaking up her forearm was a thick, jagged scar, a lattice of puckered, discolored skin that spoke of a violent, traumatic injury. It wasn't the clean line of a surgical incision. It was the chaotic signature of shattered metal or a high-impact wound. A nearby chief petty officer, a man who had seen his share of combat injuries in Fallujah, instinctively recognized it for what it was. He frowned, his eyes narrowing in thought. That was no kitchen accident. Evie quickly pulled her sleeve down, her movements fluid and practiced, but the image was seared into the minds of those who saw it. As she began her walk of shame away from the VIP section, she passed a Marine gunnery sergeant standing guard near the ceremonial stage. Her head was held high, her posture betraying none of the humiliation she must have felt. As she passed, her collar shifted slightly. For a split second, the gunny saw the edge of a tattoo on her upper back just below her neckline. It wasn't a flower or a quote. It was two sharply angled black ink lines, the unmistakable tips of a raptor's talons. It was a familiar predatory symbol, often associated with elite aviation units. He knew he'd seen it before, but the context was wrong. What was a design like that doing on a civilian security guard? Meanwhile, the late-arriving Navy SEALs were being processed through the checkpoint. Their leader, a tall lieutenant commander with the quiet, lethal grace of a lifelong warrior, watched Evie walk away. He saw the Admiral's smug expression and the pitying looks from the crowd, but he was focused on the woman herself. He watched the way she walked, the disciplined economy of her movements, the straightness of her back. Even with the slight limp, she moved with a purpose that was deeply familiar to him. He squinted, a flash of recognition sparking in his mind. He leaned over to his Master Chief, a grizzled veteran with a chest full of medals. "Chief," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, "take a look at that woman." "The one the Admiral is chasing off? The security guard? Yeah, tough break." "No," the commander said, his voice tense with dawning realization. "Look at her. Really look. Have you ever seen her before?" The Master Chief studied her for a moment longer and shook his head. The commander's eyes remained locked on Evie's retreating form. He whispered a single word, a name, not Evelyn, but a call sign, a designation spoken with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Wraith.
Just as Evelyn was about to pass the last row of spectators and disappear from view, a sudden, piercing screech of tortured metal ripped through the air. A heavy-duty lighting rig, positioned precariously on a mobile lift near the main stage, had suffered a critical hydraulic failure. With a sickening lurch, the entire structure began to topple, its multi-ton weight arcing directly towards a section of bleachers filled with sailors, families, and children. Panic erupted. A collective scream went up from the crowd as people scrambled to get away. Uniformed personnel, including Admiral Thompson, froze for a critical second, their minds struggling to process the unfolding disaster. It was in that split second of chaos that Evelyn Reed transformed. The quiet, unassuming security guard vanished. In her place stood a commander. Her voice, no longer soft or measured, exploded with a power that defied her frame. It was a voice forged in the roar of jet engines and the crucible of life-or-death decisions.
"Brace and cover!" she bellowed, the command cutting through the panic like a razor. It was not a suggestion, it was an order imbued with absolute instinctual authority.
As people instinctively dropped or shielded their loved ones, she moved. Her limp was gone, replaced by a ruthlessly efficient stride. She didn't run from the danger, she ran parallel to it, her eyes calculating the trajectory of the falling rig with a pilot's spatial awareness. "VIPs against the bulkhead, stage right," she yelled, pointing towards the solid steel wall of a nearby ship. Her directions were precise, unambiguous, and immediate. She saw two young sailors standing paralyzed with fear and pointed directly at them. "You two, get the children clear, now! Use that maintenance corridor!" Her finger jabbed towards an accessway no one else had even noticed. The sailors, jolted out of their stupor by the sheer force of her command, immediately complied, their training kicking in as they began herding families to safety.
The lighting rig crashed to the ground with a deafening boom, its metal arms smashing into the bleachers just seconds after the last family had scrambled clear. It landed exactly where she had anticipated. The immediate danger was over, but the pier was in chaos. Through it all, everyone from the rawest seaman apprentice to Admiral Thompson himself had simply watched, utterly dumbfounded. The woman he had just publicly fired and dismissed as a rent-a-cop had just taken decisive command of a mass casualty situation, assessed the threat, issued clear orders, and coordinated an evacuation in the space of about 5 seconds. She had moved with a level of tactical competence and chilling composure that most career officers spend a lifetime trying to achieve. The SEAL team, who had been moving to assist, stopped and watched her work. They didn't see a civilian contractor. They saw a fellow operator, a professional, moving with an expert's deadly grace. The lieutenant commander's suspicion hardened into certainty. He knew exactly who he was looking at. The legend was real. As the dust settled and the initial shock wore off, a stunned silence fell over the pier. Base personnel and first responders began to move in, but the immediate crisis had been averted, thanks entirely to the swift actions of one woman. Admiral Thompson stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and confusion. He looked at the mangled heap of metal, at the now safe families, and then at Evelyn Reed, who was calmly checking on a small child who had fallen during the scramble. The SEAL lieutenant commander didn't wait for an invitation. He strode purposefully through the stunned crowd, his path unwavering. He walked past junior officers, past decorated captains, and directly past the still frozen Admiral Thompson. He stopped about 3 feet in front of Evie, his entire team falling into formation behind him. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her with a profound professional respect. He noted the scar on her arm, now clearly visible, and the intense focus in her eyes. The authority she had just projected still lingered around her like an aura.
Admiral Thompson, finally regaining his voice, marched over, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "What in the world is going on here, Commander? Who is this woman?" The SEAL commander never took his eyes off Evie. His voice was quiet, yet it carried with perfect clarity across the silent pier. "Admiral," he began, his tone laced with a deference that was somehow also a rebuke. "I think you know who she is. You just don't know what she is." He then turned his head slightly to face the Admiral. "Sir, with all due respect, you are addressing Major Evelyn Reed, United States Air Force, retired." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. An Air Force major here, working as a security guard? It made no sense. The commander let the title sink in before delivering the final earth-shattering piece of the puzzle. He looked back at Evie, his expression one of pure reverence. "Her call sign," he said, his voice dropping an octave filled with the weight of legend, "is Wraith." The name hit the air and seemed to hang there, shimmering and deadly. Wraith. For the aviators and special operators in the crowd, the name was mythological. Wraith wasn't just any pilot. Major Wraith Reed was a ghost, a whispered story of one of the first and most decorated female F-22 Raptor pilots, a pioneer who flew clandestine missions over hostile skies, a pilot with more confirmed combat hours in the 5th-generation fighter than almost anyone,
a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross for an action that was still classified. She had vanished from the service years ago after a catastrophic high-altitude ejection that it was rumored had nearly torn her apart. They said she'd never walk again, let alone fly. And now, here she was, in a security polo on a Navy pier. The silence was no longer shocked. It was sacred.
Without another word, the SEAL commander's back went ramrod straight. He brought his hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to slice the air. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer. It was the salute a warrior gives to a hero. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it is an absolute honor." The commander's salute acted as a signal. Instantly, his entire team of hardened Navy SEALs snapped to attention, their hands cracking against their brows in perfect unified respect. The sound echoed in the stillness. The Marine gunnery sergeant who had seen the Raptor Talon tattoo finally understood. The symbol belonged to the F-22 community. His posture straightened, and he executed a flawless salute of his own. Across the pier, the chain reaction was immediate and overwhelming. An Army colonel, a guest of the new ship's captain, saluted. The Air Force veterans in the crowd, men and women who had only heard stories of the legendary Wraith, came to attention, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Then the sailors themselves began to salute. From the young seamen on crowd control duty to the grizzled command master chiefs, a wave of respect washed over the assembly. The sea of dress whites became a forest of salutes, all directed at the quiet woman in the khaki pants. They weren't saluting a security guard. They were saluting a warrior who had walked out of the sky and was standing among them.
Thompson was the last to move. He stood there utterly paralyzed, the world he knew having been turned completely upside down. The woman he had insulted, belittled, and publicly humiliated was a decorated combat veteran, a hero from a sister service whose reputation far outshone his own. The shame that washed over him was a physical force, hot and suffocating. He saw the hundreds of salutes not as a challenge to his authority, but as a judgment of his character. Slowly, deliberately, as if lifting a great weight, Admiral Thompson raised his own hand to his brow. His salute was stiff, formal, and held far longer than protocol required. In that single, silent gesture, he conveyed a profound and deeply felt apology, an admission of his own arrogance, and an offering of the highest respect he was capable of giving. The air on the pier was thick with the unspoken truth. True honor is not demanded by rank, but commanded by courage, and in that moment, all the rank on the pier belonged to the quiet woman in the security contractor's uniform. Evelyn Wraith Reed did not revel in the moment. The sea of salutes, the silent, awe-filled stares, it all made her deeply uncomfortable. This was the exact kind of attention she had spent years avoiding. She held their gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable, before giving the SEAL commander a single brief nod. It was a gesture of mutual understanding and acknowledgement from one warrior to another, and it was all that was needed. As the salutes were lowered, Admiral Thompson approached her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep and genuine humility. His face was pale, his voice strained. "Major Reed," he began, stumbling over the name. I don't know what to say. My conduct was inexcusable. There is no apology sufficient for the disrespect I've shown you." Evie looked at him, her hazel eyes holding no trace of malice or triumph. She saw not an admiral, but a man humbled by his own mistake. "We all have a job to do, Admiral," she said, her voice returning to its normal, quiet cadence. "Today, mine was this checkpoint. That's all that matters. Please see to your guests." She then turned and began to help the first responders check on the families in the bleachers, her duty-minded focus immediately re-engaging. She was already moving on. The story of what happened on the pier that day spread across Naval Station, Norfolk like wildfire. It became a lesson whispered in briefing rooms and retold in mess halls. It was a story about the unassuming security guard who was once a legend in the sky. It was a powerful reminder that the greatest heroes are often the ones who seek no glory, the quiet professionals who continue to serve long after they have taken off the uniform. Major Evelyn Reed's story is not one of supernatural strength or impossible feats. It is a testament to the quiet dignity of service. It teaches us that courage isn't measured by the rank on a shoulder or the volume of a voice. It's measured in the calm resolve to do the right thing. Whether you are flying a $100 million fighter jet at the edge of space or simply standing your post at a gate, her life is a profound lesson to us all. Look beyond the surface. Honor the silent warriors who walk among us, and never, ever underestimate the person standing the watch. The quiet heroes, the ones who ask for nothing and give everything, are the true backbone of our nations. Their stories of sacrifice and silent strength deserve to be told, to be remembered, and to be honored. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more military stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.